Well, thank you. Thank you, Dean Villamil. And it's my honor to be up here with perhaps the state's foremost economist. Many of you know him as dean of the business school, but Tony is famous everywhere as a great economist who, what is it you say about economists who give forecasts and predictions?
Well, if you're going to forecast as an economist, you should forecast often. In other words, you forecast all the time, so if you're wrong, you can change it.
Yeah. Yeah. That way they can never say you were wrong, because at one point or another you were right.
You can move fast.
Yes, it's kind of like being a good stockbroker. When I was in law school, we had a securities professor who said that if stockbrokers knew anything, they'd be calling it in from the pool, and that's probably true. So we're going to talk today about success. Obviously, everybody goes to college, is certainly looking for a successful life and career. I wonder, because we're in the law school, how many of you, intend to be lawyers? Anybody? A few of you. Okay, well, that's an honorable thing to do. I did okay with it. Whether you're talking about law, science, teaching, really doesn't matter, because the basic principles of career and life success are essentially the same. I wrote about it in that book, but there's really nothing new in any book on success or any book on self-improvement, because the basic principles have been known and written about for at least a century. And whether you go back to Napoleon Hill or any of the old books on the subject, people call them different things. They may describe it differently to relate with different generations or with different demographics. But the principles are pretty fundamental and pretty enduring. When I wrote this book, it came about because my wife kept saying, "You need to write a book." All right, I'm busy. No, you need to write a book. I said, well, I have a problem with that, because I can't write fiction, because unfortunately I can't tell a story. I really admire good fiction writers, but I can't do it. And I can't write a nonfiction book, because unlike Tony, I don't know anything. She said, well, there must be something, I said, well, I know what makes successful people, and I know a lot of successful people, and it might be useful to write about that. I start off in the book talking about the old expression, old being about when Tony and I were kids, about going for the brass ring. Is anybody familiar with that expression? Anybody under 50 familiar with that expression? Go for the brass ring. You ever hear that? No. Well, I'll tell you where it came about. When I was a kid, we had merry-go-rounds or carousels, and they would go around and round just the way they do now, and usually the kids would be on a horse, the horse would be going up and down while the merry-go-round's going around, and they had a mechanical arm just out of normal reach, and in it were little brass rings. And the trick was, as you came around, if you could reach out and grab the brass ring, you could trade it in for a prize. And all you had to do in order to get the brass ring was the right combination of timing, stretch, and risk. So if your timing was good, if you stretched a little, and you took some risk, you could get the brass ring. And to me, that was a great metaphor, because it works for success in life. Really, that's all you have to know. Some good timing, and that's not entirely out of your control. Stretching, taking some reasonable risk. Problem with the brass ring on the carousel was that liability, all you lawyers being what it is today, they were taking too much risk, and you have kids and ending up, in order to get it, falling flat on their face. But if you apply these same principles to life success, and you fall on your face, all that gets bruised is your ego. The other way, on the merry-go-round, you could break your head. Now, it does help to have luck, but a lot of luck we make. I have a friend who many years ago said, and I've heard this expression from others, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. What does he mean by that? He says, well, you know, you can have an opportunity fall right in your lap, but if you're not prepared, if you haven't got the background and given yourself the tools, then the opportunity doesn't matter because you lack the preparation. On the other hand, you can prepare and prepare and prepare, and, well, an opportunity may not present itself, but far more likely, you may not recognize it when it does. And it's important to be open to recognize opportunities when they present themselves. And they're not always what you thought they would be. You know, the genesis of the book goes back to when my oldest daughter, who's going to be 39, was just entering college at FSU. I took her up there. It was the first day of school, checked her into the dormitory, and I said to her, do me a favor. Take out a paper, get a pen. I'm going to tell you some things. I want you to write it down, give you a list of things that if you follow this list, you'll be successful in life. Now, this daughter actually did it. She actually took out the paper, wrote it down, and I did it. The other daughter, my younger daughter, would have said, what, are you kidding? She's just as successful in her sphere, but less likely to take direction, which is why she's a director in theater in New York. She's very good at giving direction. I hadn't thought any of this out. I hadn't written it down myself. Just it came off the top of my head, and I ended up giving her 10 things that you follow these 10 things, call them rules if you want, and it virtually assures a successful life and career. And she wrote down the 10. Well, many, many years later, 20-something years later, when I decided I'm going to write this book, I remember that I gave her this list, but I never wrote it down. I took a shot. I called her. I said, do you have that list? You remember back in college? She said, yeah, I still have it. So give it to me. And that became the chapter headings of the book. And I ended up consolidating, and so I ended up with what I call the 8 secrets of the super successful. I would have preferred 7 because it's more alliterative, but it turned out to be 8, and so that's what I gave you. Now, in order to do the book, I figured while I have my conception of what successful people, how they think, what they do, that it would help if I interviewed a lot of other very successful people in their fields. And so I went out and I talked to a lot of people and included their interviews, their life experience, and no surprise that, of course, it fit neatly into the chapters that I devised because I didn't get anything I wasn't expecting, but I got it across a broad range of people. I wanted to make sure that I had represented equally men and women, that I had Hispanic, African American, white, different age groups. And really it didn't matter. Life experiences may have been different, but the attitudes and practices were pretty uniform. I did encounter one surprise that I wasn't expecting. I found almost without exception, perhaps entirely without exception, if I go back and think about it, these highly successful people did have something in common that I wasn't anticipating. All of them were either first-generation Americans or the first generation in their family to go to college. I'm the first generation in my family to go to college. And the only conclusion I could draw from that was that what that provided them was a certain belief system. They believed you can do it. They believed the American dream. First, you have to believe it before you're going to do it. And the second thing they had was a hunger. They were hungry for this success. Now, whether they came upon it naturally or studied or had mentors, whatever it was, these people all learned and employed what I call the fundamentals of success. And that's what I want to talk to you about. You learn things as you go along. I remember one of the first important lessons I had was when I was 17 years old. I was on spring break visiting Miami Beach. I came down with some friends and stayed at a hotel right on the ocean. It was owned by a little old lady by the name of Mrs. Evans, who, if you looked at Mrs. Evans, you'd think that she's homeless and outgoing, she's going to have a cart somewhere. But turns out she not only owned that hotel right on the ocean, but a lot of other real estate on Miami Beach. And she took a liking to me, and while some of my friends went out to the ocean, I would sit there and talk business with her, and she gave me some advice. And she gave me 3 pieces of advice I'll always remember. No need to write them down. She said, number 1, buy real estate. But don't buy where everybody else is buying. Buy further out and let the development come to you. That was good. The second thing she said, very important, she said, remember, no partners. And then the third thing she said is go to the racetrack every single day, and in every single race, bet the favorite to show. You'll never make a killing, but you'll make a 10% annual return on your money. Now, unfortunately, I didn't follow any of the 3 pieces of advice. Actually, I did. I did, over the years, try to buy a fair amount of real estate. That came in part from advice I got from somebody else. There's a very, very wealthy guy who always remember to turn off your cell phone when you're going to do something like this. There was a very wealthy guy in Miami. And I was, a young legislator, and he was a fellow who would contribute money. And but we became friends, and I would sit in his office, and he too would impart advice. And one thing he told me, he said, at your age, and I was in my 20s, he was probably in his mid-50s and worth many millions. He said, at your age, all you have to do is make 1 investment a year. Could be anything. Buy a piece of property, buy a stock, make 1 investment a year. By the time you're my age, you'll be very wealthy. And I can't say I did it every year, but I did try to do a lot of that most years, and it did pay off. Now we're talking about success, but a lot of people have different conceptions of what that is. What is success? Is it the same thing for everybody? Who can give me some idea of what success means to you? What is success? Let's not be bashful now. Somebody. Come on. Way back.
Well, it could be doing what you want to do when you want to do it.
Yeah, what you want, yes. Freedom to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Of course, that probably has limits because you could also end up in jail. Yes. Being happy. Happy's good. Fulfilled. Yes. Life aspirations. Okay. What are they? Well, now we're back in a circle, aren't we? That's tautological. Yes. Rich, sure. Most people are embarrassed to say that one. What else? Yeah.
Having a dream job.
Your dream job, yeah. It could be so many things. It could be money. It can be power. It could be fame. But it could also be service, being of service to other people. It could be family and having a nurturing family life. It could be any of those things, but I think you probably find true success and real happiness when you have the right balance of those things. I think that too much of any one thing without the right balance is not going to lead to a truly successful life. I know somebody worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and one of his kids committed suicide. Another one was in the family business, and he fired him because they couldn't get along. Successful guy. You know, and none of us would want that success, even with all that money. So balance, I think, is important. Another thing that's worth remembering is that you can't do everything all at once. Whether it's compounding interest in a bank account or taking incremental steps in life, or even if you say, I want to lose weight. I want to lose 40 pounds. Well, I'm not going to lose 40 pounds next week. You know? If you take any aspiration and you say, I want to improve by 0.1% a day, well, that's not bad. That's not bad. That's 24% a year. You know, multiply it out, and that's pretty good improvement. So whether it's generating business for your business, you know, I want to be a rainmaker. If you're going to be in law, highest and best use. You know, plenty of people can do the work and do it competently. Far fewer can bring in business. But nobody is a natural rainmaker that the business starts pouring in the first day or the first week. It's incremental. It's a learning process. It's a talent like most every other thing. And yes, I think happiness is essential to true success, but how does one really determine happiness? Can you choose happiness? You know, I'd submit you can. A few years ago, I heard the Dalai Lama give a speech, you know, here in South Florida. And somebody asked him how come he can be so calm and, you know, seemingly happy all the time. And he said, well, you know, I'm like anybody else. I have the same emotions. I can be angry. I could be sad. I could be disappointed. He says, but think of it as the ocean. On the top, the waves can be very turbulent, but beneath the surface, it's always calm. And that's how I try to live. Some people who know me say to a fault, but I think I think we can make that choice. And another thing I recommend, that I think most successful people would recommend, is to choose gratitude. Be grateful for what you have. Be grateful for what you accomplish, and not, you know, you see so many people that are resentful over what they don't have or what they haven't achieved, and that's poison. You can never build a successful life or career on a foundation of resentment. You can very easily build one on a foundation of gratitude. So always choose optimism over pessimism. You know, does that mean you don't worry? People worry. I worry. But worry about things you can affect. Don't worry about the things you can't affect. It also matters who you hang out with. Hang out with positive, can-do people. If you hang out with folks who are negative, negativism is a poison and it's contagious. Get rid of, purge negative, unhappy people from your life. If you hang around positive, can-do people, then that's how you'll be. Another common feature of successful people I've found is their generosity. You'd be surprised how being generous to others without any ulterior motive will come back in a positive way into your own life. Now, perhaps just doing things unselfishly Maybe it's ultimately selfish because people will want to do for you. But don't do it as a strategy, just do it as a choice. I remember years ago, I met a fellow who was, I guess you can call him a financial advisor. He was a stockbroker. And we were introduced, and he said, "Do you know so-and-so person, the CEO of this big company?" I said, "No, I don't know him." He said, "Oh, you really ought to. You two have a lot in common. You'd get along. What about this person who heads this company?" I said, "No, I don't know him either." He said, "Well, let me introduce you to these people." And he did. He introduced us to them. One of them became a client. And he never asked for anything. 2 years later, we were looking for a financial advisor for our pension plan. And he submitted a proposal. Now, if his proposal had not been as good as anybody else's, he would not have won. But he won because when they're equal, who are you going to give it to? You're going to give it to the person that helped you. And that's okay. Another bit of advice that maybe it's easier said than done, but worth thinking about and worth making the effort, is to believe in yourself. You must believe that you can do it. Because if you don't believe in you, nobody else will believe in you. If you exude confidence, first of all, you have to feel it before you can exude it. But if you exude confidence, people will have confidence in you. If you believe in you, people will believe in you. Now, it's true that there are a lot of things that can influence success, that can affect it one way or another, that are natural attributes or advantages that people have. Now, there's certainly the influence of parents. If you're fortunate enough to be in a two-parent family or have parents that are supportive, I've seen people with parents that tell them, "You'll never amount to anything." Well, they could start to believe that. Then you have parents like mine who said, "You can be anything you want to be." "Oh, you're smart. You're great." Maybe parents these days overdo that because they're doing it with kids that aren't so smart. But supportive parents helps. It's tougher if you're a woman or a minority. That's just life. It is. So the successful women and the successful minority, men and women that I know, do work harder to get to the same place. It's just life. There are other natural advantages. Some people are taller than others. I think if you check, you'll find that in every single presidential race, the taller guy won. There are people who are better looking than others. They have an advantage. But they're not overcomable advantages, and they're certainly not worth dwelling on because they're not things you can really do anything about. Remember, go back to the point, worry about the things you can affect. I heard an interview just a couple of weeks ago with Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, I think, dropped from second to third richest person in the world this year, mostly because he gives so much to charity. And the interviewer said, "Well, how much of what you've been able to accomplish is luck?" And being a fairly humble person, he said, "Well, I have to say that I had luck. I was lucky to be born into a two-parent home of supportive parents. I was lucky that I was born a white middle-class American, and I didn't have the same obstacles to overcome that many minorities do. But that's luck. But many people have the same luck, and then there are many people that don't have it but manage to overcome anyway." And I believe that's true. Now, when we talk about success, I always say, well, simplest thing. This is my first rule, that it's only a two-step process. Step one, set a goal. Anybody want to guess what step two is? Do it. Now, that seems simple enough, except you cannot imagine how many people have a goal, more likely an aspiration, because it's not entirely concrete, but they have a goal, and they will spend their life agonizing about it, worrying about it, thinking about it, planning about it, and they never do a damn thing. And then you have people that it's all frenetic energy. They're always doing, they're always active, they're always on the move, but they've never stopped to think about what they're trying to accomplish and how they plan to get there. You need to put the two together. And when you do, you find that it's not that hard. And set a high goal, but an achievable one. And then when you reach it, set another one. I would try to be fairly specific in goal setting. For example, I want to be rich isn't specific enough. I want to make X dollars in Y years is more specific. I want to be able to have this. Try to be specific. I heard an interview with Donald Trump a few years ago, and he said, and by the way, I don't hold Trump out as the model of what we should all aspire to be, but he is fairly rich, and he does know a lot of successful people. And he said, I'm quoting, "People agonize over details for months, and nothing ever happens." You got to do stuff. I'd recommend asking accomplished people for advice. You'd be amazed how willing people are, including perfect strangers, to give you advice and to share their knowledge. When I first moved down to Florida for law school, I was 20 years old. I didn't have any friends here. I didn't have any relatives here. I didn't have anybody here. But I did have a goal. I knew that I wanted to be in public office. I knew I wanted to be in elective office. And I chose Florida as a place to do it because I thought we had a terrifically open political system. And we still do. Very open political system, very open business community. I always said it's a wonderful land of opportunity. If I had wanted, to be in the legislature in New York, where I grew up, and I graduated law school at 23, the odds of me being in the legislature at 26 would be somewhere between 0 and 0.1. Because in their system, they have a club system, the Democratic club, if it's a Democratic area, the Republican club, they decide who gets nominated, who gets put up. You wait your turn until you get the nod. Down here, you want to run? Run. If you think you can win, give it a shot. Doesn't work the first time, try it a second time. Figure out what you did wrong the first time or what you can improve on the second time. But when I came down here, I did a little research, and I discovered there was a retired U.S. senator from Washington, state of Washington, living here and as a consultant to one of the banks. And I just called him. Senator, I'm moving to Miami. I want to be in politics. I really admire your career. I was wondering if I could come by and just talk to you a bit. He said, sure. And we talked several times. We had several meetings, and he was happy to do it. And you'll find that that's pretty generally true of successful people. It's, like I say, it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's one of those little facts of life. People are happy to share. When I first got into the legislature, there was an older lobbyist, one of these guys that worked for all the real special interests, the liquor people and the gambling people, and but I liked him, and we were friendly, and he gave me a piece of advice. He told me, ask people for favors. And if they do a favor for you, they become indebted to you. I said, wait a second, you got that backwards. He says, no, I got it right. If somebody does a favor that helps you along in your career, they're now invested in you, and they're going to want to help you more. So as counterintuitive as it was, turned out he was exactly right. So many of us are afraid to ask for help or ask for advice. And it's amazing how free people are with it. I'm going to watch the clock because I got to stop at time for the Q&A, because that's how somebody gets a book. I mentioned earlier, in connection with the brass ring, don't be afraid to take risks. You should take risks. Now, don't take crazy risks. You're not going to find me skydiving. I don't take risks that can kill me. I remember there was a movie called Grand Prix. It was probably out when I was in college, and it's starring James Garner. And somebody asked him about being a race driver, a successful race driver. And he said, well, in order to really be a successful race driver, you have to have a certain lack of imagination. I think that's probably also true to be a successful, anything that involves extreme physical danger. Unfortunately, I have too active an imagination to do any of those things. But you have to be willing to take some risk. Now, that's general. Let me give you a specific. How many of you make to-do lists? Right? Well, that's a good practice. A lot of people make to-do lists. How many of you who make to-do lists religiously do the things on that list in the order in which you wrote them down? All right, if not that, how many of you will always choose to do the harder ones on that list first? All right. Well, that's what you want to do. Either take it in order or do the harder ones first. Too many people get in the habit of doing the easy things first. I'll get this out of the way and then I'll get to that. I'll get this out of the way, then I'll get to that. And what happens is you get in the habit of doing easy things. Get in the habit of first accomplishing the hard things. Easy things will be easy. By the way, also not a bad idea to start a do not do list. Think of all the things you do that waste time and say, all right, I'm going to start a do not do list, and I'm not going to do this anymore. And try to adhere to that one. Anybody tell me what the greatest limitation is on yourself for your own accomplishment? What's your greatest limitation? You bet. Wade's got it. The biggest limitation you have is the limitations you put on yourself. It goes back to belief. Believing in yourself. If you envision a successful outcome of something, you're far more likely to have a successful outcome. Anybody know the name Fred Smith? It's an easy name. Who? Fred Smith. FedEx. Fred Smith started FedEx. And he went to Harvard Business School, where his project was he wrote up the business plan for FedEx. And he got a C- because the professor told him it wasn't practical and it wouldn't work. Now, he might have chosen to believe that. After all, this is a professor at Harvard. Instead, he did it. And not only performed a very good service for the rest of us at a time when nobody else was performing overnight delivery, but he made himself very rich in the process. Seeing what can be, visualizing the success you want is important in almost anything. Jim Carrey, the actor, comic actor, was telling the story how he moved to Hollywood and couldn't get anything and was so broke he had to live in his car. But in his wallet, he kept a check made out to himself for $20 million, saying that one day I am going to get that for one film. I think he was the first guy to get a $20 million check for one film, because he always had that image in front of him. We all tend to imagine things worse than they are. Winston Churchill tells the story of the old man who on his deathbed said, "I had so many troubles in my life, most of which never happened." And, it goes back to negativity versus positivity, and it really helps to maintain a focus on the positive. Another one we learn in school: procrastination. And we're all guilty of it from time to time. We just don't want to make a habit of it. Procrastination is the enemy of accomplishment. Sometimes we procrastinate for what seems like a good reason. We haven't got it the way we want it yet. I remember my younger daughter in high school was never finished with a project on time because it was never 100% perfect. That's probably true. And I had to explain to her more than once that 95% and finished is a lot better than 100% and not finished. If there are deadlines, meet the deadlines. If there aren't any, impose some on yourself. Finished is better than perfect. Not that we shouldn't aspire to perfection as close as we come. There are some areas where that's fairly important. If you're building airplanes or bridges, more or less probably isn't the right approach. You do need to be not pretty accurate. You need to be accurate. But you can procrastinate in that too. One thing that's always served me very well is what I call go with your gut, by which I mean trust your instincts. We have a tendency to overthink almost everything. We try to analyze every aspect of a decision, particularly the life decisions, the big decisions. I have a lot of trouble deciding which restaurant we should go to for dinner, so I try to let my wife make that one. But I don't agonize over, what to do professionally, where to live, what school to go to. Do I join a partnership or not? These are very important decisions, but I believe they are best made at an instinctive level. And the best way to do that is to relax. Just relax and be receptive to the answer that already lies there in your gut. And then don't try to find ways to talk yourself out of it. We all do it. You got to try not to. Anybody familiar with Malcolm Gladwell? Anybody know the name? Malcolm Gladwell? Yeah. Who said blink? Blink. Yes. Malcolm Gladwell's first book actually was The Tipping Point, which is probably his best. What I admire about him, we had him as a speaker for our clients a few years ago, and I asked him, I said, The Tipping Point is in the business section of Barnes & Noble, the psychology section, the sociology section. Which is it? He says, well, it's really all of those. And I figure, boy, what brilliant marketing, because it shows up in all those sections. So wherever you're shopping, you'll find his book, which is why it was on the bestseller list for like 100 weeks. The tipping, just to digress for a second, Tony mentioned that I'm consul for the Czech Republic, and a number of years ago I brought President Havel, who had led the Velvet Revolution and became the first president in 1990 or 91. And I brought him here to Florida for an appearance, and Governor Bush said he'd like to meet him. So I had the two of them meet for a private meeting, and Bush asked Havel, how'd this revolution come about? What led up to it? And Havel said, well, 3 weeks before it happened, there is probably nobody in the country, including me, that thought it would happen in my lifetime. And then it just happened overnight. And Governor Bush said, well, I've been reading this book, The Tipping Point, and many things happen like that in society, in science, that what's really happening is you're building up and up and up and up to something, and then it seems to happen overnight, but it just reached the tipping point. Well, that was Gladwell's first book. The next one was Blink. One after that was Outliers, which is also very good. In Blink, what he's saying is that the most important decisions that we make, including many life or death decisions, we don't stop to think about. We make them in the blink of an eye. If a cop's in an alley and somebody jumps out of a doorway, he can't stop and think, do I shoot or do I not shoot? If he's thought that long and he's wrong, he's already dead. The decision is instantaneous. But it's not really. It's the product of hours and hours and years of training, so that it's like this computer, which is the fastest computer out there, has quickly calculated all the possibilities and given the answer. Don't stop to think about it. Listen to it. And I think that's the same of many of our great life decisions, and even some not so great life decisions. I think about in my business. Now, if we've got 160 or so lawyers right now, over the last 40 years, this is our 40th year in business, I've probably hired at least 500 more lawyers that have come through and gone over the years. In order to hire one lawyer, I probably do 10 interviews. In order to get to 10 interviews, I've probably seen 100, well, more. I've probably seen 200 or 300 or 400 resumes. And when the resumes come in, do you know how long I spend per resume? How much? 30 seconds. Much too much. It's about 5 seconds on a resume. In 5 seconds, I know, do I want to see this person or don't I? And if I see the person, when the person walks in the door, how long before you think that it takes me to know I am not going to hire this person? About 30 seconds. I'll be polite and spend 20 minutes, but I knew it. But I knew it in 30 seconds. Now, the opposite isn't true. It doesn't mean I knew I would hire the person. You know, that takes a lot more time and vetting and analysis. But I knew I wouldn't. Now, you could say, well, that doesn't sound right. That's not fair. That's frivolous. You know, how can you make a reasoned decision in 5 seconds on a resume? How can you make a fair decision in 30 seconds when somebody walks in the door? And the answer isn't, I didn't. Because over 40 years, I've seen about 40,000 resumes. I've done probably 6,000 or 7,000 lawyer interviews. It's really experience. It's not instinct. Instinct is disguised, experience. And you have to learn to trust it. Anyway, so on important life decisions, my advice, don't overanalyze. Go with your instinct. Listen to the little inner voice that's there, telling you. Now, if it's too much of an inner voice, it could be schizophrenia. But most of us have a little inner voice we do recognize and should listen to. Now, there are some things that I really, truly believe that are not negotiable. I do believe there is an absolute right or wrong. I do believe there is absolute good and bad. And when you're faced with those choices, always choose the good, always choose the right, even if you feel it's short-term to your disadvantage or negative. In the long run, it never is. The last one I'll give you, because I want to do some Q&A, but I have a bunch more, so you can get the book on Amazon.com. The last one I'll give you is a story that goes something like this. It's not exactly true, but it's close. Winston Churchill, the great man who saved England in World War II, years after the war, is invited to give the commencement address at a university. And the president of the university says, Mr. Churchill, will you please come up and speak to our students? And he lumbers up, slow, elderly, and he looks out at the students and he said, never quit. And sits down. And the president says, well, yeah, thank you, sir, but can you expand on your remarks? And he gets up again slowly, goes up to the podium, says, never, never, never quit. Now, the real speech was never give in, never give in, never give in. But in any event, you get the idea. If you have that goal, hold on to that goal and pursue it vigorously. If you have a game plan, just like in football, the teams that go to hell are the ones that deviate too quickly from the game plan. Stick to the game plan. Doesn't mean you're not going to encounter obstacles. Every great endeavor does encounter obstacles. But as Joe Torre, the baseball manager, said, tough times don't last, tough people do. So on that note, let me turn it over to you. Take questions. We'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. Anybody?
This is the time. Thank you very much, Alan.
Yeah. Yes?
What do you read and what recommendations would you have for us, things to include in
Oh, that's a good one. What do I read? Well, one thing I do read a lot, believe it or not, are books on things like self-improvement and success. I remember when my younger daughter, who's now 30, was in college. She went to a performing arts camp, and one of her friends was Bryce Howard, who's Ron Howard's daughter. And Bryce is now a very successful actress herself. And my daughter was going to college in Boston. Bryce was in New York, and my daughter went down to visit her one day, and she called me, and she said, the strangest thing, both of our fathers are very successful, and yet you both read success books all the time. How do you explain that? And I said, well, Tiger Woods is very successful on the golf course, and yet he'll stand there and hit 3,000 balls in the morning because you have to remind yourself of the fundamentals. For enjoyment, I read a lot of novels. I just go through them like crazy. I love spy novels. I love crime novels. Nonfiction, there's probably never been a business book I haven't read. I'm sure I've read more books on marketing, management, leadership than anybody in any MBA program in the country. For daily reading, I believe in reading your daily newspaper. I tell my lawyers, most of whom I'm sure don't listen, that that's very important to read the newspaper every day. I said, you could skip the first section, because the first section, you're going to hear that stuff on CNN 40 times during the day. And if you want to read the sports section, good for you. But the two sections that you must read are the local news and the business news, because that's where the action is. That's going to help your career. Now, don't get me wrong, you really have to know the stuff in the first section too, but that's a lot easier to come by. I get several magazines that I read. I get Forbes, I get Time, I get Florida Trend. And by the way, when getting Time, the first half of it are the stories you already know about. Read the second half, the art, the theater, the music, because when you're dealing with people in real life in business, it helps to know the things that they're interested in and to be able to discuss it with them. When you're selecting a jury and you ask, what are your hobbies? And they say, art. And you say, who do you like? And they'll give you an artist. If you can discuss that artist, you made a lot of points with that juror. So knowing a lot of things about a lot of things is very useful. Harvard Business Review, others. What else? Yes, back there.
Remember, only students, Dr. Caldwell, only students get the book. No dean or professor get the book. So.
Yeah, way back there, yes. Yes? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. How did I come up?
How did you come up with the steps, and which one do you think is most important?
All the steps in
Well, I don't know which one is most important because I really see them as pretty equal. It may be the first one I gave you, the two-step process of success: set a goal and do it. But all of it, really, you could just read the chapter headings, and every one of them is a life lesson that, if taken together, doesn't guarantee, nothing guarantees success, but will tip the scales toward it. How'd I come up with it? Beats the hell out of me. Maybe reading all those hundreds of books and assimilating the ideas of other people. I really don't think anything is entirely original. The greatest musical composers in the world have probably heard all the other composers, and something got assimilated in the process. Yeah, it's one of those hard Justice Jackson, when writing an opinion trying to define obscenity, he wrote, "I'll know it when I see it," because it's very hard to give a definition that will always stand up in court. And I kind of view it the same way. I'll know it when I see it. But there are some things that are quick disqualifiers for me. I don't want to see somebody where this would be their sixth job in 12 years. I don't like to see movement. I like to see stability. If I'm going to be your second job, fine. But if you've been through 3 before me, sometimes the headhunters say, "Oh yeah, but he's got good reasons." I don't care. I don't care. I don't care what the reasons are. I'm not going to take my time. Go misspell something on your resume and see how that plays. So there are some really quickies. People start off with these real bull beginnings, mission statement. To be the most effective, blah, 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 doing the most, blah, blah. Who cares? Get that, you're wasting space. Get down to what you've done. And I like to see people who've done other things, who have certain life experience, who are engaged in the community, who have hobbies that, if I'm going for a litigator, I might want to see somebody that plays sports because I want a competitive personality. When I was hiring community association lawyers, condo lawyers, I loved finding people who either had done teaching or show business, because they can get up in front of the membership of a condo or in front of the board and explain things, sometimes complex things, in simple ways. So there are a lot of things that I look for. Who else? Yes? Yeah.
How do you pick yourself up after facing a major life obstacle and keep going towards your goal? And have you had that experience?
I think everybody has had that experience along the way. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I'll give you that. And the answer is, my younger daughter, who I had this discussion with this morning, doesn't like this answer when I say get over it. One way that I like to deal with things, because you have many conflicting forces in your life. I'm very good at compartmentalizing. You put it in its box, and that's over there. And now I'm going to focus on this. And like I said, not always the easiest thing, but you can learn it.
And how do you carve out time for hobbies and other activities aside from work? I find it very difficult to put things down and say, okay, like now it's time to move on to something else. How do you make them go home?
Well,
How do you put that?
my younger daughter, who, as I told you, is a director, theater director in New York, and the older one is very accomplished. The older one got her law degree at UM and simultaneously got her master's in psychology at Nova, and has been very good in her career, and has a son, is about to have a daughter, and balances life very well. The younger one, years ago, she would call me. She said, "I'm very concerned that I just feel like I'm obsessed, that all I can think about is what I want to accomplish in my work and how I'm going to go about it. Is that a problem?" I said, "Well, you know what? In order to make it in your field, which is one of the hardest there is to make it in, maybe in the world, you've got to be pretty obsessed. In fact, you got to get right up to the line of obsession without crossing it. If you cross that line, you go insane. So you have to get right up to it, but know when to pull back. And so sometimes you just have to remember those boxes, create a box for something else, and a little discipline. But I'm like you. I retired as managing partner of the firm a year ago, so I don't have to go in at all. But I go in almost every day. And as Tony said, I'm on the Enterprise Florida board. I'm on Beacon board. I'm teaching a course at Law School. I told a friend of mine recently, I'm doing all this because I have no hobbies. And he said, well, that's not true. That's your hobby. And he's right. And he's right. But I don't play golf. I don't play cars. I don't play games. But I do read a lot, and I read a lot of fiction. Yes? Well, I'll tell you, the reason I describe that, there's always room at the top, is that it goes toward what I consider where your aspiration should be. That's why I chose the building for the front cover, because of the way it tapers up to the top. If you don't set your goals high enough, at the bottom rung of every profession, there are a lot of people, and it's very crowded. As you get higher up, believe it or not, it's not nearly so crowded, and there's a lot more room for you. So you might as well set your sights here. If you set your sights here, that might even be tougher than here, because there's a lot less competition up here. And so that's really the reference. Your question is, have I reached the top? Well, maybe because of a personality defect such as I've been describing, I don't know that I would ever consider myself as having reached the top. There may be other people who think that compared to them or compared to others they know that I have, but I've never felt that way. But by the same token, I've never held regret or resentment for what I have accomplished and have great gratitude for what I've been able to do. Yes?
Is there a field of law that you feel is in its infancy right now, has a lot of growth potential in the future?
You know what? You're more likely to know that than I am. I started a field of law. There was no condo law till I created it, and now it's a very large field. When I went to law school, I always tell law students, take the basics, because now, I used to have to take 2 semesters of tort, 2 semesters real estate, 2 semesters contract, 2 semesters criminal. Now all the law schools only require 1 semester of those, and they got loads of electives. And some of them, quite frankly, I see as bullshit electives. The women and the law of outer space. Even all these guys that take sports law. You know how many sports lawyers there are going to be? Maybe 3 in town. But the fundamentals, get the fundamentals, because you don't know what's going to happen. The reason I didn't take employment law was because when I went to law school, it didn't exist. Environmental law I didn't take, it didn't exist. Technology law, when I went to school, it didn't exist. So fields come along that you can't even anticipate. But if you have a good preparation in the fundamentals, and you have vision, and you see something. So we created a field that didn't exist. A few years later, early 80s, I went to 3 of my lawyers, young lawyers, that were unusually adept at this new thing called computers. They actually kind of got it. And I said to them, I think this is going to be a big thing. And if you want, I've already started a field of law. I don't particularly want to do it again, but I think there's another one here. And nobody knows anything about computers. So look up the congressional hearings, read about them, write some articles, go make some speeches. I'll support you for a year. You'll be the top expert in the country in computer law. Not one of them would take me up on it. They didn't want to take the risk. And what is it today? I don't know. One that I'm starting now with several people in my firm is what I call P3 law, public-private partnerships, because I think that's going to be the wave of the next decade or two in creation of infrastructure. And the only firms that can do it are the ones that can pull together the elements, which we can, from different practice groups, from construction, from real estate, from finance, from government, and create a new synthesis from it. And we're starting that up right now. You know, what's next year's? I have no idea. Good luck. Maybe you'll be the one that finds it. Yeah.
What's the best business decision you've ever made?
Best business decision you've ever made, huh?
Best? Well, I have to say, since the firm has been reasonably successful, it may have been partnering up with Gary Poliakoff, because I always felt that I had very good vision, but I was horrible at details and and focus. And Poliakoff was terrific in the weeds, and had total mastery of details. Now, of course, the way it came about, you could say it was a great business decision, but I'll tell you a quick story of how it happened. Back in law school, I had a best friend. We did everything. We dated together, we studied together, and so in our senior year, there was a trial practice course, and in our trial practice course, insurance companies gave the law school real cases to litigate as an exercise and required their insureds to cooperate and be our witnesses. And we were partnered up. And I expected that my best friend and I would partner up to handle the case. And I discovered he went with somebody else. So I picked somebody I was somewhat friendly with, Gary Poliakoff, and Gary and I partnered up for that case. And we represented a man in a traffic accident by the name of Charles Blaney from Hialeah, at a time when there were probably Blaneys in Hialeah. And we won Mr. Blaney's case in law school, and then that was it. And I go practicing law with I started a firm with some partners, and including this best friend of mine. And then 3 years later, I go and run for the legislature. I get elected. I come back to the office, and he says, "We decided we don't want a politician in our law firm." So I was out of the law firm I created. So I called my old friend Gary Poliakoff and told him this story. And Gary says, I'm working for my father-in-law in a manufacturing business. I'm trained for law. I'd like to start practicing. Would you want to team up and partner for a law firm? I said, well, I don't know. Let me think about it. Next day, I'm in my office. My secretary says, there's a man here to see you by the name of Charles Blaney. Now, I hadn't seen Charles Blaney since the law school class 3 years earlier. Never heard from him. He comes in, says, I passed by here. I saw your name on the door. Just curious how you're doing. And he said, whatever happened to that other guy? You and he made really great partners. I took that as a sign. I called Gary. I said, we're going to do it. Never saw Charles Blaney again in my life. Somehow things are intended to happen, and that's what leads to your great decisions. Yes?
Yes, did faith have any room in your scheme of success?
Well, I'm not a religious person, so if by faith you mean go regularly, I don't attend synagogue regularly. We did the Passover Seder last night. We'll do it again tonight, but do the abbreviated version. My wife's family does the full version. It'll take 5 hours before you get to eat dinner. We'll do the shorter version. Thank you. But if you go to the last chapter of my book, when my daughter read the book, she said, it's a very spiritual book. I said, well, no, not really. It's very practical advice. The last paragraph, the last chapter, perhaps, because I do talk about path of life, the paths of life, and the determination that may not be entirely yours, my kind of Charles Blaney story. And she said, no, the whole book is. And maybe if you go back to things that I say about believing in an absolute right and wrong, in an absolute good and evil, that you could classify that as elements of faith. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I feel like sometimes, I guess the hardest part is taking the words that can become abstract, and I guess just words, I guess personalized to yourself. With me and a couple of different year graduating from law school in a month or so, are there any people that you interviewed of them that were attorneys? Are there any criteria, personality traits, things of that nature that you found consistent with their beginning of their careers?
Well, at the beginning of their careers, I can't say that's true. I did try a number of years ago. I think I was on a vacation that was lasting much too long. So I sat down and said, I want to figure out what makes for the really great lawyers in the firm, the ones that do terrific work, the ones that the clients appreciate, the ones that get paid. Because if clients aren't paying you, it's usually just a way of protesting. The ones that get more business from clients, what are the common characteristics of my best lawyers? And so I actually sat down to make a list. And I said, well, let's see, are they the hardest workers? And I concluded, no, they're not. Yes, they work hard. In order to make it in the business or in any business, you have to work hard. But they weren't necessarily the hardest workers. There are other people who worked at least as hard, maybe harder sometimes. So, well, it's the smartest people. No, it wasn't. Yeah, of course, they all had to have smarts. And yes, I love to see law review on the resume or a federal clerkship on the resume. Not because I'm elitist and not because it's a guarantee of some elite student coming out, but because to me it's some indication that maybe they can read and write, which a law degree is not any longer. But it wasn't necessarily the smartest people. And the one conclusion I came to, the one quality that all the best lawyers had in common, was that they were the ones who cared and who projected caring. They were far more likely to call the client at 8 at night and say, I've been thinking about your matter. And far more likely to ask about the client's life and take the time to understand their business and understand their lives. And so I'm looking initially for people that may have that sort of empathy, whether it's something they've done in the community, whether it's something that comes across to me, which is intangible, and I don't know. But the one quality that's the best predictor of ultimate success in the law firm is caring. And I was very disappointed to find that, actually, because you can't truly test for it, and you can't really teach it.
One question over there.
Yeah.
Oh, you're fine. Hey.
You had one?
You said that one of the principles of success is taking risks. How do you measure, what do you use to measure the risk? What do you consider when
Well, is it apt to kill you? I wouldn't try it. There's a great book out now. I'll give you two books. There's a guy by the name of Taleb, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Black Swan. And The Black Swan is about unexpected events. Like everybody knows there are only white swans until you see a black swan. And, and the book, the guy is actually, he was a trader on Wall Street for 20 years. He's a mathematician. He teaches math courses at NYU. But his field of expertise is probability and risk. And he in the first book, he talked about unexpected events, The Black Swan, very good book. His latest book is called Anti-Fragile. And the central thesis is, I'll start off, he says that there, in neither the English language or any language he has studied, is there a word for the opposite of fragile. And there is not. He could not find it, so he calls it anti-fragile. Some people say robust, but robust isn't the opposite of fragile. Fragile will, if it breaks, it's destroyed. Robust survives. That's not the opposite. Anti-fragile grows and gets stronger from adversity, disorder, and chaos. And he talks about both fragile and anti-fragile in human or other organisms, in political systems, in social systems, in businesses. And then he also has a portion where he's talking about optionality when you're assessing risk. So if you view almost anything in terms of optionality, we all know about options in real estate. I am risking a relatively small amount, but if I am right, all I can lose is a relatively small amount, but I can make an awful lot. And in real estate, it's usually a fixed awful lot. But in many other aspects of life, it's unlimited. So really what it comes down to is an assessment of what you stand to lose versus what you stand to gain. All right? If I take 5 lawyers from different practices who are profitable, leaving them alone, and say, I want you to devote a third of your time to building a new P3 practice, what do I stand to lose? I stand to lose probably as much as a few $100,000 in building over 2 years. If I'm right and we gel and we're the first, what do I stand to gain? Well, doing that in condominium got us up to $60 million a year. So that's how I assess the risk. By the way, that leads me to one more concept. If you got 5 minutes, I'll give you. I mentioned that in condo we were the first. It's not a marketing class or marketing discussion, but I'll give you a quick marketing lesson that you can apply to any field. And my source for this is a small book by a name called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, written by Jack Trout and Al Ries, R-I-E-S. They wrote several books together. They wrote several books separately. But I like this one. It's only about as thick as my little finger here. Tiny book, 22 Immutable Laws. And I'll give you the first 3 or 4 laws. Whatever you want to do, whatever business you're in, the best thing you can be is first. All right? First. If you can be the first, that's the best. Because usually the first becomes the biggest. And in the minds of most people, first or biggest equates to best. May not really be, but perception is reality. And you want to be first. But that's not always possible. So if you can't be first, you want to be second. If you can't be Coca-Cola, you want to be Pepsi-Cola. If you can't be Hertz, you want to be Avis. If you can't be Kleenex, you want to be Scott. But what if you can't be second? What do you want to be? Anybody? Third, okay. Now, Coke is first in cola. Pepsi is second. Who's third? Well, the answer is RC, but Coke has about 50% market share. Pepsi has about 42% market share, and RC Cola has 3%. So being third doesn't do them much good. All right, Hertz is first, Avis is second. Who's third in rental cars? Enterprise, National, Budget, Alamo. I don't know. One of those guys down there. You know? All right? Now, if you can't be first, you can't be second, then what you want to be is the opposite. So if you can't be Coca-Cola and you can't be Pepsi-Cola, you want to be the uncola. What's the uncola? 7-Up. They were the first uncola. Who was the second uncola? Sprite. Who's third in that category? I don't know. You know? All right? So you can't be first, can't be second. Be the opposite. Can't be that, be the second in that category. Works in department stores. You got Neiman Marcus, you got Saks. You have Walmart, you have Target. Try to find the third nationally in either of those categories. It's not so easy. And so if you can't be one of those four things, what do? You know, it's often taken. The answer is you create a new category. In sodas, it might be Fanta. It might be Mountain Dew. What the hell is Mountain Dew? I still don't know. All right? It's its own category. All right? You know, in rental cars, actually, Enterprise really created a new model. But if you want an even newer and better model, Zipcar. Because as you get into marketing, past those first big categories, narrower and narrower gets better. If you can't be Neiman Marcus, you can't be Saks, you can't be Walmart, you can't be Target, don't say Kmart or Sears, they're dying. So you be a big box that specializes in one thing. You be Toys R Us. They're the first, they're the biggest. Who's second? Oh, there is a second, I just forget. And you can't find a third. So anyway, that's my quickie. Since the idea of first happened to come up in your comment, I always like giving that one to people thinking about how they're going to create their future success. All right, thank you all. I enjoyed it.